Hey, this is Gilly Woodhouse on the Osteo Business Podcast, talking all things osteo business. Here's Gilly Woodhouse, an author, speaker, award-winning business coach, and passionate advocate of osteopathy.
Hello, so I'm very excited today to welcome Matthew Redford from GOsC, and I really appreciate you spending a little time with me today, Matthew. And I've got lots of things I'd like to talk to you about. But first of all, a little bird tells me that you're probably one of the longest serving members on the team. Is that right?
It is indeed. And well, first of all, Julie, lovely to be with you this afternoon. It's great to be able to have the chat and to sort of talk to you about sort of all of the interesting things that we've got going on at the moment. Great that we've been able to find the time. So thank you for sort of helping to arrange this. Yeah, I have been at GOsC for just over 25 years now in total. I'm not
Really?
the longest serving member of the staff. There is one other colleague in the organisation who's been there fractionally longer than I have, but it's a great place to be and it's a great profession to be involved in. So I think that, it's a credit to the osteopathic profession that you've got people who both come into the General Osteopathic Council, but also, other sector organisations as well, and want to stay because actually there's a real benefit to both working with osteopaths, patients, and others. So yeah, it's a great place to be. And time has flown past. I can't quite believe 25 and a bit years have disappeared already.
No, that's amazing. That's a long time. So I guess you've seen quite a lot of change over that time too.
Yeah, it's been a real evolution over that period. And people have said to me, sort of outside of work, friends and family members, they've said, oh, you've been at GOsC for 25 years. That's unusual in the current sort of climate. People tend to have, sort of multiple jobs rather than, one organization. And I've said to people that in many ways, I've seen GOsC change and evolve so much over that period that it's almost as though it's been sort of four or five organisations, even though it's just been one organisation for 25 years.
Yeah.
Because when I first started, that would have been at the end of or towards the end, I should say, of the transition period. So osteopaths moving from, voluntary regulation into the statutory regulation period. So seeing the end of that sort of transition through to where we are today, which is an entirely different sort of landscape that we're dealing with. And, crikey, through the course of those sort of 25 years, there's been a whole heap of change that's happened in terms of, the organisation's grown, the profession has grown in number, the council has changed from what was 24 members of council, of which the profession elected individuals, through to now a much more board type structure where individuals are appointed onto the board. And we've had a little thing, such as a pandemic in the middle of all of that as well. So,
Yeah.
it's been a really sort of, sort of significant period of change. And I've been, thrilled to be part of that.
Yeah. What would you pinpoint as the main change then, Matthew?
So I think the professionalisation of the profession, and I think the professionalisation of GOsC as well. I think when we were first sort of established under the Osteopaths Act, in many ways we were breaking new ground. There hadn't been a healthcare regulator set up for a significant sort of period of time, and we were having to sort of adapt to that. So seeing that sort of change happen over, that period, and the organisation, move from really, as I say, sort of setting things up for the first time to actually a much more professional, robust organisation that I think is wanting to be much more connected to the profession. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, through the course of the conversation today about how we can be much more regional in terms of the way that we operate, how we can put much more of a human face on what we do, so we can be less seen as that sort of ivory tower organization and much more about how we can build the relationships. And I think that's one thing that's certainly changed over time. Regulation has moved from here's a whole heap of rules that we have to follow to
Yeah.
let's have a dialogue, let's have a discussion, let's build relationships between us, patients, osteopaths, sector organisations, and let's work much more in collaboration together in order to get the outcomes of high quality patient care. And osteopaths deliver high quality patient care. I think that's really, really
Yeah,
important to say up front. And, that's obvious from all of the work that we do and all of the surveys that we undertake. Patients really value the opportunity to see osteopaths and to be treated and to get benefit from osteopaths.
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right to nail that there are such high standards of care. I only have to read the posts in my osteopathy works group to see, someone coming in with an unusual problem with a patient and asking for help, and the level of thinking that goes on, and the experience that people share. It's just phenomenal. It blows my mind. I can read an entire post and all the comments and I still don't know what they're talking about, but I can tell that this is really high level stuff. They really know so much. It's incredible. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've
Go
both
on.
been privileged when we've been able to attend the events that the Institute of Osteopathy run, the conventions and the conferences, and listening to the conversations and the debates
Yeah,
that take place there. It's really high quality and absolutely on par with what takes place across the healthcare sector.
yeah, absolutely. So what does a typical week look like for you, Matthew?
A typical week. Wow. So normally a working week never survives the first shots of battle on a Monday morning. I think that's fair to say. All best laid plans that you want to try and undertake sort of fall away. But a normal working week, there will be lots of conversations that will be taking place across the organisation. I'll be talking to the different teams to understand, what work they're up to. Is there any particular sort of challenges or difficulties that they're facing? Can I sort of step in and be of assistance and any barriers that need to be sort of dealt with. But there's also conversations that then take place across the sector as well with our sort of partner organisations and being sort of abreast of those. Collaboration is really important. So, those sort of conversations have to happen. Because we are a creature of statutes, we have an overarching council. So there's often conversations I'll be having with our chair of council, Joe Clift, who joined us in April 2024. And
Oh,
so
I met
Joe's been
her.
yeah, Joe's been in place
She's
for a couple of years
amazing.
now. Used to be
Yeah.
involved with the Institute of Osteopathy. And so, often Joe and I will sort of, have conversations on a weekly basis about, the strategic sort of matters that are impacting on council. But we have the council board. There are a number of subcommittees that we have as well. So often there'll be sort of papers that we'll need to prepare that will go forward to those particular boards. So it's a lot about that sort of strategic planning and making sure that the direction of the organisation is moving in the right way. I'm incredibly lucky, Gilly, to have a fantastic staff team who have
Mm.
got such breadth and depth of knowledge. And so I don't have to be that chief executive that's got their sort of hands in all of the pies and over all of the conversations because the team are fantastic in that space. So it gives me that opportunity to take more of that sort of helicopter view and then to be able to sort of engage in a slightly different way and to do the fun stuff such as having the opportunity to talk to you today.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna have some fun now and again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, great. So I also thought perhaps we'd tackle some of the main myths that crop up time and time again about what you're actually responsible for. And maybe we can then talk about what you actually are responsible for. Because I know the big one that's been there forever, that I've been around, which is about 13 years now, is why aren't GOsC doing any marketing for us?
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, we both know that that's not your job. It's the IO's job, as far as I know, and each individual clinic as well, to be
Yeah.
marketing, which is where I started. In fact, 13 years ago was in teaching marketing, online marketing, because I knew that was the fastest way to get more patients, which is the outcome thereafter. Um, yeah, tell me more about any other myths that you come across
Well, you're
regularly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Gilly. That one of the big myths that exists is that GOsC should either be lobbying government on behalf of the profession, or that we should be promoting osteopathy and osteopaths. And you're right that that is very much a role that falls to the professional membership body, the Institute of Osteopathy. I can understand where the myth sort of stems from. So when the council was established, the Osteopaths Act at that particular time did have the statutory responsibility for the regulator to both regulate, develop, and promote the profession. But that was removed really quickly from our legislation, as it was all of the other healthcare regulators as well, because of the inherent conflict of interest that exists between regulating a profession and promoting it. So I do
Yeah.
understand why that myth has sort of lingered and perpetuated, but it absolutely is something we're fundamentally prohibited from doing. It's been removed from our act. We're not there to promote the profession. Um, what we can do is we can talk about the high standards that osteopaths meet. We can talk about the fact that the osteopathic practice standards reflects modern societal expectations, society needs. We can talk about the high standards that osteopaths are educated to, that are trained to, and that they keep CPD requirements, continuing professional development requirements up to date. So we can
Yeah.
talk about those aspects, but we can't go out and promote the profession and say to the wider public, you must go and see an osteopath because they're fantastic, even though osteopaths absolutely are. That's not something that we can do.
Right.
Um, some of the other myths that crop up, and I think this is a really interesting myth that occurs, and I think this is in part because regulators have that tendency to be slightly removed from the profession and to be sort of perceived, as I said earlier, to be sort of in the ivory towers.
Mm.
There's the perception that osteopaths are not involved in key decisions that are made by the council. Now, interestingly, the council is made up of 10 people, five lay members, five osteopaths, who are all elected onto the board. They set the strategy, they set the direction. Osteopaths are involved in every committee that we run. Osteopaths are involved in fitness to practice decisions that take place, both at screening stage, investigating committee, and final professional conduct committee hearings that happen. So the osteopathic voice is really critical in all that we do, and osteopaths are involved in all of the decision making that takes place within the organisation. But there is a myth that, it's a group of lawyers or some accountants sitting in a room somewhere making all of the decisions, and that's not the case at all. Osteopaths are very much represented in that decision making.
That's really good to know, actually, because it's something I sort of half knew because I know a few different characters that have been on committees, etc. But I didn't realise how all-encompassing it was, that there's osteopaths involved in everything, which is really good to know.
It's really important. It's really important that the osteopath voice is heard, because osteopathy's got such a broad sort of church. There's a real diversity in terms of the profession, and it's
Yeah,
important that that's reflected within the decisions that we take. It's important that that's considered. So, our public consultations that we run, we want to hear from osteopaths so that the osteopath voice is heard. That's why it's important that we're engaging with a range of sector organisations to understand what's taking place in practice. And I think there's more that we can do in order to be a little bit more regional in terms of the way that we undertake our work. And as I say, I know we're going to sort of touch upon that sort of later.
mm,
But talking to organisations such as the Institute of Osteopathy, the National Council for Osteopathic Research, Osteopathic Alliance, and all of the educators, all of the sort of the educational institutions, we can gather the osteopathic voice through those channels and feed that into our work. And then the committees, which include osteopaths on all of those committees, can ensure that informed decisions are being taken across a range of our activity and across all of the policy development we undertake. Really critical that that happens.
yeah,
And I think one of the other things we've introduced, Gilly, that I think is worth sort of flagging, is what we call a council associate scheme, and this is a scheme where two osteopaths are able to sit around sort of the council and the committee table and actually have their opportunity to learn, to develop, to see how governance works in practice, to have a voice, albeit that they don't have a vote because they're in that sort of development sort of role. But it's an
Right.
opportunity for individuals to effectively to enhance their skills and potentially become future leaders of the profession. So again, we see that as an important aspect of our role to try and sort of identify those future leaders and bring those through, not necessarily to work at the General Osteopathic Council, but again to work within the sector as well. So developing that osteopathic voice and leadership is something that's important to us. And as I say, is a bit of a myth that exists that we don't include osteopaths in our work.
Right. And how does somebody apply to become a team member on a committee or an associate, as you just mentioned?
So whenever there's a vacancy that we have, Gilly, that's advertised through the e-bulletins that we send out. And those monthly e-bulletins will contain information about the particular roles, and they will direct individuals to our website in order to make applications. We're trying to not make that process onerous. We want to obviously ensure that there's a rigor and a robustness to the recruitment, but at the same time, we don't want to sort of try and sort of make it a particularly sort of challenging sort of process for people to go through. And all of our roles are paid roles as well. I think
Oh,
it's important to sort of say that individuals wouldn't be expected to give up time out of practice without some form of reimbursement. So depending on the nature of the role, there's reimbursement for that and expenses paid as well. So hopefully that will sort of encourage individuals to put themselves forward. And we've got a really good, excellent group of individuals working across our fitness to practice committees, our governance committees, and our council as well. We're really lucky.
yeah, yeah. And what type of people do you find joining you? Are they clinic owners? Are they highly experienced? Are they quite new? Or who typically likes to join you?
It's a real mix, Gilly, and actually I think that again is a reflection of the strength of the profession. There's such a diversity of individuals that we've got, from individuals who are relatively sort of new into practice, who are wanting to, sort of expand their governance experience and are looking to sort of step in. We've got individuals who, as you've sort of said, have been in practice for, a good number of years, who have been involved in education, who, running highly successful sort of practices, who are involved. It's a real mix and a real diversity, and that's really important, so that we've got that sort of breadth of experience coming through. I think what we are really keen to always ensure is that there's no such thing as a daft question.
Yeah,
So, we want people to create, we want to be able to create an environment where people can bring all of themselves into that space and to bring their experience, their knowledge, their skills, their different perspectives, and to bring those lenses to our work, because you just get a better outcome. And
yeah,
if you've got all of those different views coming together, then, you know, if there's a gap that we've missed within the executive team and we present a paper and somebody looks at it from a different angle and is able to, give a different sort of perspective on an issue, we really embrace that. That's fantastic. And osteopaths absolutely bring that to the table.
yeah. I've got that way of thinking as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to know actually, because yeah, it might be that they sort of slash through something and go, do you know what? Why do we need this stuff here? And then you could say, right, we'll get rid of that because it's actually complicating, not simplifying or whatever.
Exactly that, Julie. And I think, we involve patients in our work as well. And I think both osteopaths and patients, are able to cut through in a way that is really beneficial. And I remember there was a particular sort of focus group that I attended not that long ago, actually, and presented, some work that we were sort of planning to take forward. And some of the feedback was really positive. And then there was one piece of feedback which was this all makes complete sense. Now can we put this into some plain English, please? And it was, and it, but it was, but actually that was such a good piece of feedback because,
Yeah.
we were close to it, as somebody that had helped to co-author and co-write, some of those materials, we knew exactly what we were trying to say, but having a different lens on that just went, we get it, we understand it. It's not going to land in quite the way you want it to because it's a little bit too jargonistic, and that was really helpful.
Yeah, is it in all aspects of life, we can sometimes be just too close to the thing to be
Yeah.
able to see something plain and obvious that someone else can just go, well, why don't you do that? Or
Exactly. And
no,
that's where the committees and that's where council have that, oversight and scrutiny role, and they're able to, to challenge, they're able to ask those questions. And having the osteopath voice involved in that is really beneficial. Helps to shape our work in a way that's well, I just simply don't think our work would be as good if we didn't have the osteopath voice involved in what we did. It's as simple as that.
yeah, and I think it would alienate you from the profession because they would feel that their voice was never heard and that there was all these big decisions being made that they had no control over. So
Yeah.
it's comforting to know that there is an opportunity for their voice to be heard. And can the osteopaths generally connect with those people that are involved in GOsC to help to get feedback through from a wider range of people? Does that happen?
It does. It does happen, and I mean, in terms of our council members, all of those individuals, their sort of biographies are available on our website, so that all of that's transparent and open. Um, in terms of the engagement that my team and I do, we go along to regional group meetings, be that online or in person, depending on what a regional group would like.
Hmm.
And if there are regional group leads listening to us and listening to this podcast, Gilly, and they want me or a member of the team to come along to talk about a topic, we're really up for that. We're really open to that. So reach out and give us a shout, and we'll come along. Um, we'll go along and attend when the Institute of Osteopathy are running conventions, so we can engage with osteopaths in that way. So we want to have that contact. And that's why we've also introduced some new communication channels just over the course of the last year to enable people to have greater access to the staff team. So we run every Tuesday between 12 and 1 a drop-in where people can log online to a Zoom call, a bit like we're doing now. There'll be a couple of members of staff, and that's on a rotating sort of basis. And you can ask any questions you want to during that period. So there might be something that's troubling you, or something that you just want to sort of find out. You can log on during that sort of window, ask a member of staff, and if we're able to answer it there and then, we will, or we'll take that away and we'll get back to you straight away.
That's really good because I know there can be a fear that they can't bring a question because it might implicate them in something, or well, I don't know, they might say the wrong thing. I think there can be a bit of worry around that. Um, for instance, I saw a post earlier, someone saying their associates accidentally allowed their registration to lapse. And now the link won't work in the email, so they're desperately trying to rectify it, but they haven't been able to get through and sort it out. And so the clinic owner is then concerned about what position they might be in. And, maybe they're fearful to actually just ring up and see what could be done to resolve it without anybody getting into terrible trouble and getting a slap.
Yeah.
What would you say to that kind of, worry?
Pick the phone up and give us a call. So colleagues within the registration team, be ready to, talk individuals through, their options. We've got
Mm.
colleagues in our sort of professional standards team who talk to osteopaths about particular dilemmas that crop up in practice, and talk through the issues with them and how they apply to the osteopathic practice standards. So reach out and have a chat with us. I think there is that perception that regulators, are sitting there with a big stick waiting to hit you. That's not what we, what's not what we're there to do. We don't want to have that sort of reputation. I think
Mm.
it's inevitable because of the type of work that we do. We do receive concerns about osteopaths, from members of the public. We do have the responsibility to investigate those concerns. So I can understand why there is that sort of fear and that trepidation.
They don't
But
want
we
to put
want
their
to try
hand
and,
up.
yeah,
So, I think
absolutely.
I've done something wrong, sir.
Absolutely. And Julie, I think, we can all relate and experience that, when a brown letter lands through the sort of the letterbox from Revenue and Customs, your
Mm.
first thing that you think of is, have I not paid enough tax? What's happened?
Yeah.
As opposed to actually it's just a reminder that you need to submit a tax return or your new tax code for the next year is X. But there's that instinctive worry that you've done something wrong. So I get it. I do understand that. I would say, reach out, have a conversation. We're all human beings, and this is where we want to put more of that human face on what we do as an organization and how we work as a regulator. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we've always done everything, brilliantly, or we've always, hit the right tone. We've had some conversations internally over the course of the last sort of year or so about our tone of voice and how we can, have a more engaging sort of tone of voice. And I think it's fair to say that some of our communications historically have been a bit Big Brother-esque and have landed heavily, and I recognise that. Um, and I think, one of the things that we're also looking to do is to change the website, and that's going to be that's a project that's underway at the moment, and there'll be a new website coming from the summer, and I think that's important as well because when people engage with us on a one-to-one basis or in a regional group setting, they have a very different experience, I think, to the letter that lands or currently
Mm.
the way our website looks at the moment, which is old, which is dated, which isn't reflective of the of who we are and the message that we want to get out. Um, so we're doing a lot of hard thinking about trust. We're doing a lot of thinking about how we can build trust with the profession. And I think if we think about trust, there's a particular equation that we have been sort of using to help us in that. And trust is sort of basically sort of built by having credibility, reliability, intimacy, but you're not in it for yourself. And I think that, you know, when I look at the work that we do, I think if we say we're going to do something, we do it so we can
Yeah.
be sort of reliable. We're externally assessed by an overarching body called the Professional Standards Authority.
All
And
right.
every year since they have introduced standards that we're assessed against, we've passed those standards each year. So I think we've got that sort of credibility. We're not in it for self-interest because there's no shareholders involved. We're not about dividends or anything of that nature. It's about the public, it's about patient protection. I don't think we've done enough around intimacy. And that's about how we can build the relationships more, and particularly with, making our work relatable to osteopaths on the ground. It's easy to talk about, we've done this wonderful policy here, we've done this wonderful policy there, and et cetera, et cetera. But what does that mean to somebody who's getting up on a Monday morning and working in, practice, seeing patients through the course of the week? How do we make our work more relatable, more relevant? How do we discuss the value of what we do in a way that perhaps we've not done before? And so we want to change the dynamic in terms of how we work. So, we're really open to suggestions on that. So, if anybody listening to the podcast again has got any sort of thoughts about how we can, build that trust and how we can do more in that space, drop us a little line. We'd be really happy to hear those suggestions.
Yeah. And I should ask you now then, where do they drop that line to? What's
Mm.
the best way?
So contact us either via email, and there's an email would be info@osteopathy.org.uk.
Right.
So people can contact us via that route. There's the drop-ins that I've mentioned earlier that people can can get in touch and speak to us every Tuesday. That's between 12 and 1. People can come online and have a chat to us there. And then there's our website, which is www.osteopathy.org.uk, and there's routes on there to contact us. But one that I would mention, and it's a new route that we've introduced, which is proving to be incredibly popular. It's a WhatsApp channel. So
Oh,
people can WhatsApp us and get a really quick response, either an answer to the question or here's a contact for somebody that you need to sort of speak to. And so that telephone number, which is manned 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, is 0207 046 0406.
cool. Oh, I'll pop that on the notes so they've got
Super.
it. That's great. So would I be right in thinking that would be quite anonymous way to contact you
Yes, it can be.
for those
It,
who are, just a bit fearful about
yeah,
perhaps a conundrum they have or a
yeah,
situation they find themselves in which they're not sure what
yeah,
to do. Um, that sounds really good, actually, Matthew, because I know, particularly perhaps the small clinics, there's a lot in my experience of small part-time clinics that are being run around a family, and they can be quite lonely and isolated, and then they can end up in huge fear over something,
yeah,
and be scared to reach out or tell anybody.
yeah,
I sometimes have anonymous posts in my group because they feel very, very vulnerable to
yeah,
actually put their hand up and say, I might have been stupid, or
yeah,
or I sometimes there's something awful happening, like um, a patient starting to come onto them,
yes,
or making threats about their family. I've heard in the past,
yes,
like very scary things that they don't know how to tackle something like that when they've got a reputation to maintain
yeah,
in a possibly small community. So
mhm,
I think that's I'm not surprised that's popular, actually, to
yeah,
just be able to pop a message and just say what should I do, and to have some kind of answer or be pointed into the right direction, or even just told, look, don't worry, we can help you with this, you're not in trouble. I think is will help to just calm them, and so that they can do the right thing.
You're absolutely right, Gilly. We have what we would describe as those sort of ethical sort of queries, those ethical sort of dilemmas. There's
Yeah.
about 1,000 of those that we would deal with over the course of a normal business year.
Yeah.
And some of those are quite simple and straightforward. Others are much more complex in the way that you've described. But what
Mm.
I'd really hope that people listening to this sort of hear is that, we're there to try and support osteopaths. We're there to work with you and to help. And colleagues within our professional standards team, are really experienced at being able to, talk through issues using the osteopathic practice standards. And as you say, sometimes just having somebody that you can talk it through with, we certainly have had situations where people absolutely know the answer themselves, but they just need to verbalize that and have that conversation, and they can do that in a safe way with us.
Yeah, so then they know that they are handling something in the correct manner.
Absolutely.
It's complicated because they're dealing with other human beings, aren't they, who
Yes.
might not all be as grounded as some of us, and
Yeah.
might be behaving irrationally or unfairly or whatever. And obviously, doing the right thing is critical to their profession and their work, their job, and income and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that's there. It really is, because I think that just being able to reach out and say, look, this is going on and I've no idea how to handle it,
Yeah.
it is helpful, because obviously they're going to get the exact correct direction to take, rather than guessing and being scared that they're going to still end up in trouble because they actually did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So that's really, really helpful. Um, And I wanted to ask you as well, actually, Matthew, about the independent support service and what is that all about?
Yes. So, when members of the public raise concerns about osteopaths, I think, let's recognize that that's an incredibly challenging and difficult experience for the patients, but
Mm,
equally, it's an incredibly difficult and stressful period for the osteopath as well.
absolutely.
And the independent support service is a service which is entirely removed from the General Osteopathic Council. So
Right.
it's something that we fund, but we do not receive any information about conversations that have taken place with the independent support service. So it's a service that's delivered by Victim Support, and it's something that we've had in place since 2019 that's
Oh,
there to support patients, to support witnesses, and to support osteopaths who find themselves going through a fitness to practice process. And it's available from the moment a complaint is made. So it's not just something which kicks in if a complaint is referred on to a final conduct committee hearing. It's something which is available, from the outset. It's available 24/7, and it is that sort of confidential, safe space for people to talk about their feelings about the process, to talk through what might be expected of them at each stage. And that particular service, as I say, is run by Victim Support, which is a national charity. They've got the structures and systems in place to be able to support people. So it's a helpline which is available 24/7, 365 days a year. And the caseworkers are really experienced in order to sort of talk through those particular issues. Not only is it available from the moment something lands, if a complaint does go all the way through to a hearing and the conclusion of a case, then that support service is also available for 3 months after a case has been completed as well, because we recognise that the difficulty, the stress, the anxiety doesn't just end on that day. There's a
no.
continuation afterwards. So it's a service which is available for the whole profession, and something that we're really proud that we can fund. But absolutely, to reassure people, we don't receive any details about the conversations. We'll receive a snapshot, sort of summary, statistical summary each year that would say the service has been used by X number of people. And
Good.
that's as
The
much as we know.
data. Yeah.
Exactly. Doesn't tell us who, doesn't tell us how often, doesn't tell us the nature of the conversations. And that's not information that we would ever want to sort of encroach on either.
No. Well, I like the sound of that because of course, it's stressful to be, accused of something,
Absolutely.
and vital to have the support to go through that process.
Yes.
Um, and I know that's something that can be mentioned as that it feels like an extraordinarily long process. But has any work being done or tightening that up at all, Matthew?
Yeah, and it is a long process, so Gillian, and we're really sort of cognizant of that. I think that across the healthcare sector, at the moment, there's been a significant increase in the number of concerns that are being raised against healthcare professionals. So that's not a unique osteopathy challenge. That's something across the whole sector. But what that means is that there's more cases in the system, things take longer. I think we're in an interesting position, um, in that we've got currently, as at December, just gone, we've got the highest caseload that we've had since 2016, 2017, and we're close to having the highest caseload that we've ever recorded as an organisation. Um, and of the caseload, which is about 100 active cases at the moment. Now, just to sort of qualify and say that's not 100 cases going through to hearing. That's within the sort of the overall process, from an initial concern being raised through to some concerns that are going through to final hearing. About 39% of those cases at the moment relate to osteopaths having crossed boundaries. And there's a bit of a spectrum there. I think we have to acknowledge that that could be inappropriate comments being made through to the more um, sort of serious end of the scale, which would be sort of police investigations around sexual assault. So
Yeah.
it's quite a range there. Um, and what's really important is that, the concerns are dealt with robustly, that the concerns are investigated fully, but they have to be dealt with, you're quite right, they need to be dealt with within a timely manner as well for everybody involved in the process.
Yeah.
Now, where cases are being held up at the moment, that tends to be when there's a third party involved in an investigation. And by a third party, we could mean, that could be a police investigation, that could be needing to get sort of medical reports from National Health Service and other places. And because they're under significant strain and they've got significant backlogs, that's having a knock-on effect in terms of the cases that we're sort of processing.
Yeah.
Um, so we want to move things forward as quickly as we possibly can. Um, we are at the speedier end of the healthcare regulators, but that doesn't mean that we're being complacent and thinking that there isn't anything more that we can do in order to drive these cases through as quickly as possible. And Shirley McCormack, who's my Director of Fitness to Practice, that's something which is very much front and centre of work that she leads on in order to ensure that investigations happen quickly and that cases go through to final hearings as quickly as possible. Part of our challenge, though, unfortunately, is that we've got legislation which is dated, which is incredibly prescriptive, which forces us to do things in ways that if we could sit down with a blank page and rewrite, our legislation, we would start with fitness to practice and we would move it away from being the adversarial system that it currently is at the moment to something which is much more reflective of modern practice. But we're not in that, we don't have that autonomy. It's government that has the ability to change legislation. And so we're slightly hamstrung um, by legislation that is old and dated, um, but we try and move things through as quickly as we possibly can because of the impact that it absolutely has on patients, on osteopaths going through these processes.
Do you think there will ever be an opportunity for that legislation to be modernised so it's a quicker process?
So I hope so. But I think we have to be realistic about when that might happen.
Mm.
So at the moment, the General Medical Council are going through changes with regards to their legislation so that anaesthesia associates and physician associates, always easy for me to say that, he says, they're coming into regulation. And that will mean that the General Medical Council's legislation is modernised as a result. That's going to be rolled out to the Nursing and Midwifery Council and then to the Healthcare Professions Council. And that's the order that the government has said that the legislation modernisation programme will run. But that will take up until about 2030 for those three organisations to have their legislation changed. Now, there's going to be an election in 2029, and we know that things change around sort of election periods. Is there a timeline for when our legislation would be changed, but also the legislation for the other regulators, such as the Optical Council and the Chiropractic Council? There isn't a timeline.
No.
So I've described this in different settings, with regards to change to legislation and the legislation that we work under. It's a bit like waiting for Godot. But one thing I would say, Gilly, because people, I think, sometimes hear me talk about change to legislation and they think that that means that the Osteopathic Council is going to be merged or subsumed into another organisation. That's not on the cards.
Right.
And so this is actually about change to the legislation that we work under so that we can work more speedily, more efficiently, with more autonomy. This isn't about the General Osteopathic Council being subsumed into another body, an osteopath losing their regulator.
Good. That's good to know. Um, what else was I going to ask about? Oh yes, the protection of title. That's another
Mm.
thing that people get um, concerned about. And we know that there's weekend courses where you can learn to unsafely crack a few necks and call yourself as someone who uses osteopathic techniques and so on. And I know that wasn't sadly protected when the Act went through. But what's happening with that now, Matthew?
So we really share the concern and the worry within the profession and within patient forums as well about individuals who are aligning themselves to the osteopathic title, using those phrases such as osteopathic technique. I've seen osteopathic spinal mobilization, and these sorts of phrases
Mm,
which align themselves to the osteopathic title but on their own are not sufficient to cross the threshold and become a breach of Section 32 of the Osteopaths Act, where we can then take action. And we just don't think that's right. So we ran a consultation last year, and a huge thank you to osteopaths, to osteopathic organisations who responded. We had over 370 responses to the consultation, which is absolutely fantastic
yeah.
and overwhelming support for us to try and seek a change to our legislation in order to widen the scope to give us more ability to tackle those particular instances. So I've been engaging with the Department of Health and Social Care to report the findings of the consultation and to sort of try and take that work forward. So that's with the Department of Health at the moment. It's not going to be a quick process because they've obviously got a fair bit on their plate at the moment in terms of other sort of activity that they're dealing with, but nevertheless, that's something that we're looking to do. What I would like to sort of flag up, Gilly, is something which has happened within the last sort of month or so, and it's culminated in a joint statement being issued by General Osteopathic Council and the Advertising Standards Authority, just within the last couple of weeks, actually,
Ah,
where we have both, highlighted this particular issue and this particular challenge of individuals aligning themselves to the title. And within the joint statement, the Advertising Standards Authority have provided a link to their website where concerns can be raised with them about individuals who are aligning themselves to the title. So people who are using osteopathic techniques who are not registered, members of the profession can raise these concerns directly with the Advertising Standards Authority
mm,
because potentially this is misleading advertising.
absolutely.
And the Advertising Standards Authority will take action, and they have taken action on a couple of these cases at the back end of 2025. So I think this is really positive news, and I'd really
Yeah,
encourage the profession to sort of utilise this particular route and highlight to the Advertising Standards Authority any instances of people not being registered who are aligning themselves to the title.
that's fantastic because the truth of the matter is that the general public will have no idea about the fact that osteopaths are registered probably. We're still struggling to educate people as to what an osteopath is and what they do and all the rest of it. So they're not going to, if they hear osteopathic techniques, they're going to just assume, I think, that, oh, I'm in safe hands, they're properly trained, at least,
Mhm.
they may not know about regulation, but they'll think they've been properly trained, um, because most people will know it's a degree level, um, what do you call it?
Yeah,
Uh,
the degree level programs, and
exactly, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think that's really, really important. And then the osteopaths have got somewhere to go with this
yeah,
gripe because it's probably happening across the road, around the corner, whatever, and it could be affecting their reputation just by the mere
absolutely.
fact that someone else is alluding to being an
Mhm.
osteopath and then not giving proper treatment because they don't know what they're doing. Um,
And in the
it's
conversations that I've had with the Advertising Standards Authority, they absolutely recognise osteopaths highly trained, highly qualified, highly competent. Why should, Fred down the street be able to align themselves to the title and advertise in a way that is misleading when they've not necessarily gone through the same training programs, they're not regulated, they're not holding themselves to the same high standards. Why should the osteopathic title be diminished? And the
Mm.
Advertising Standards Authority, as I say, have now issued this joint statement with us. So what I'll do, Gilly, if it's okay, if I share with you that sort of statements and that information, and if we can
Yeah,
sort of circulate that, I think that
absolutely.
would be great because we've got an opportunity here to try and knock some of these charlatans on the head, and I use that word deliberately because that's what they are.
Yes, they are, to be fair. And so what about the people who are teaching this stuff?
So what we need to do is that's a different type of conversation. And that's something which I think falls very much within GOsC's sort of space.
Right.
And I think if we can certainly, expand the powers that we have through
Hmm.
that sort of earlier path, then that gives us sort of a different route. But I think that there's absolutely an area that we need to sort of look at because it just it, as I say, it undermines the osteopathic title, and that can't
Absolutely.
that doesn't feel comfortable at all.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, talking about regulation and so on, I was talking to a fabulous young man in Canada recently, and he was saying he was an osteopath, etc., etc. But it transpired because they're not regulated there. It transpired that whilst he had undertaken a degree, it's sort of unregulated, and his training did not include diagnosis or red flags, which was a red flag to me. Because I just thought, oh my God, that's the beauty of osteopathy, where they can go, this is serious, you need to go to A&E now. And I know so many stories of people who've saved the patient's life because they have recognized immediately that this is dangerous. They're in the patient's in trouble. Um, and and it was just staggering to me that the training being given there by some individuals, it means that they can't diagnose the actual problem, so they're only treating the presenting problem, and they're
Mm.
not doing that osteopathic thing, which is to say, I know you think it's your knee, but it's actually your pelvis or whatever the thing
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
And I think that's the magic of osteopathy, really, is that they can do that. And it really came home to me. I was shocked, but it really came home to me that the thoroughness of the teaching they get here, and then the regulation to ensure that they uphold high standards, is so important to patients' safety and health.
yes.
Um, yeah, I don't know if what's happening. Are they trying to get regulated over there, or?
They are. It's so there's one province and Nova Scotia has just been given regulation, but it looks like it's going to be done on a province by province basis rather than by sort of country. So that's obviously going to sort of take some time. But I
Yeah.
think what you've sort of said, Gilly, is, again, I completely concur with. So we undertake work with an organisation called Osteopathy Europe, which brings together to membership regulatory sort of bodies from across Europe. And we also participate in the Osteopathic International Alliance, which is sort of more global sort of organisation. So there's some conferences that take place each year. But it's
Mm.
important, I think, from our perspective, that we can talk about the value that regulation brings. We can talk about the benefits of that. We can talk to those unregulated countries and sort of help sort of guide them in certain ways. Um, and I know that colleagues from Canada, really valued the opportunity of talking to both to myself, but also representatives from Australia and New Zealand at
Right.
the Osteopathic International Alliance conference that took place last year in Toronto, because why reinvent the wheel if one already exists?
Yeah,
And what can
exactly.
we learn from each other? So that's part of our work is where can we bring our insights? Where can we share our knowledge? where can we sort of engage with individuals both in the UK and also further afield in order to, you know, benefit the profession at large. And part of that also is about mobility and how we can break down barriers so that people can move between different jurisdictions
Yeah,
more easily. That's
that's
really
good.
important as well.
Yeah, because that thought came into my mind as you were saying that. It's just like I know that again in my group they'll be saying, oh, it's difficult. I'm trying to go to New Zealand, or they're in Australia and they're trying to come here, and
Yep.
all the sort of hoops they've got to jump through and forms and goodness knows what. So that sounds amazing that people can have a little bit more freedom of movement because whilst whilst we don't want them to go, we don't want
Yep.
them to leave. We need them here in the UK. But equally, if people want to go and live elsewhere and work elsewhere, then it should be easier, shouldn't it? Because they've all been trained to, a really high standard and they've been regulated. So we know that they're working correctly and professionally. Then, it's good to give them the opportunity to be able to, even if it's short term or forever, to have that freedom of movement.
Absolutely. And we've recently just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Osteopathic Council for New Zealand to make it easier for individuals who are registered with the council in New Zealand and who hold a practicing certificate to um, to come to the UK and to register with the GOsC. So we're
Oh,
trying
cool.
to eliminate those sort of regulatory barriers that exist because, as you rightly say, if there are similar systems in place,
Yeah.
then why are we duplicating activity? And actually, let's just focus on some areas that we need to focus on. And so eliminate those sort of unnecessary sort of hoops and hurdles and make it easier for people to move between jurisdictions. So that's absolutely activity that we're doing at the moment.
You've got a lot going on.
It's not as it's not a quiet time, I'll say that.
No. Oh, it's good to hear that though, because again, it's one of those common sense things, isn't it? That, it should be easy to move around if they wish to without, incurring massive expense and time on
Yeah.
forms and goodness knows what. So yeah, I think that's great work. Oh, what else? What else have I got for you today? Oh, well, I suppose we better mention Osteopathy House. That's a hot potato.
Indeed, indeed.
So yes, there's a lot of upset about the home of osteopathy being sold. Although I'm sure some people would rather not step over the threshold of that particular home. But anyway, what's happening?
So I think I think it's a really interesting point, Gilly, because we've never looked at the headquarter building as being the home of osteopathy. We think the home of osteopathy is in the practice room of every single osteopath on the register.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's where the home of osteopathy really is. And so why are we sort of choosing to why has council chosen to sort of sell the headquarter building? Well, there's two real sort of core reasons. The first is a sort of a pure sort of financial sort of driver. So um, over the course of the last sort of 3 years, expenditure has outstripped income. That's the reality of the position that we're in. And since the pandemic, we have been running a headquarter building which is predominantly empty. And we have to allocate about £150,000 out of the operational budget to maintain the headquarter building. And that's just not a good use of registrants' fees.
No.
It just doesn't make sense to effectively sort of spend registrants' fees in that way. They could be, used entirely differently. Um, Council met in February this month and signed off a budget for our coming financial year, which has a fairly big deficit attached to it because of the increase in spending that we need to use on the fitness to practice case increase and the fitness to practice caseload. So all of this leads to the fact that if you're looking to draw, pull back on expenditure, where are the areas that you can do that? And maintaining a headquarter building, just doesn't make sense in that way. And we can eliminate a high proportion of expenditure from our operational budgets if the building was sold, and that was a decision that council took. The other aspect as well is, I absolutely want to try and break this myth of being being in an ivory tower, and being a London-centric organisation. At the moment, all of our board meetings take place in London because we've got the building and we've got the council chamber where those meetings can take place. Why can't a council meeting take place though in Birmingham or Edinburgh or
Yeah.
insert any other part of the country? And why can't we then, have that council meeting in that location and say to the regional group, we're coming to your area. Why don't you come and actually engage with the council members and the board in a way that we've never done as an organisation in our history? And so I think we've got an opportunity to sort of really sort of shift our dynamic and actually to be much more regional in terms of the way that we work, much more sort of localized in terms of our sort of activity. And I think that we've got the opportunity to get closer to what we would describe as the heart of osteopathy, which is the practice rooms of everybody on the register. So, it is being driven by, a financial situation which is challenging. And like every organization, inflation isn't going in, isn't coming sort of down, so costs are only going upwards,
Yeah.
and we need to ensure that we're using registrants' fees in a responsible, careful, and prudent way, and maintaining a headquarter building which is costing 150K a year doesn't fit into that space at all. And I genuinely would struggle to look, look an osteopath in the face and be able to say that that was a good use of registrants' fees.
Yeah, and actually, obviously I'm on the business side of things. That is absolutely appalling business. Long term,
Exactly.
it's not sustainable. I mean,
No.
you've got to a point where you've had to say that we can't do this anymore. This is
Yes.
unsustainable.
Um,
We've got to do something differently.
Exactly. And I think it is fair to say, Julie, for people that are listening, we've explored options about could we bring somebody into the organisation in order to rent some space? Could we
Yeah,
look at, are there different ways that we can sort of operate in that way? We would need to reconfigure the building in order for that to happen in terms of security and the like. So we would end up we'd be spending more
more money.
money, and in terms of the sort of the financial benefit of renting the renting space out in the building, we would have to rent the whole building out in order to possibly get some form of break-even position in maybe a decade's time.
Oh,
And it just doesn't, from a financial perspective, it doesn't stack up. We've really
no.
explored those options. I absolutely get that there is an emotional attachment within the profession to 176 Towerbridge Road. We started the conversation, I referenced the fact that I've been in the organization for, 25 and a bit years.
Yeah,
That's been my work home for the last, quarter of a century. I
yeah,
get it. I understand that connection. But as you rightly said, Gillian, that's what we've had to do is we've had to go from a business perspective, what's the right thing that we need to do? And we've needed to put the emotional attachment to one side and focus on the business decision. And that's the decision that council's taken to put them up to put the building on the market, um, and to eventually sell when that happens.
yeah. And presumably that'll put some money in the coffers.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, and what it does then do, Julie, is I think it gives us an opportunity to, to reflect as an organisation upon what can we invest in order to develop the profession? What can
Mm.
we invest in order to undertake activity, what's described as upstream, in order to prevent the costly fitness to practice cases from happening downstream? So actually, I think it gives us an opportunity to have a different type of conversation with the profession, again, in a way that we've not been able to. So how can we develop the profession? How can we work with the profession in order to enhance the quality of education, in order to enhance graduate education, in order to prevent, problems from happening at a later stage. So, investment to save later. It gives us an opportunity to have that conversation. And like I've said at various points during our chat today, if people have got ideas about what that might look like, share them with us.
Yeah, far away, because this is it. It's something that lots of people may have ideas about. It's like,
Yeah.
because again, it's like having that wider view of, we see this pattern often, and we know they're good at recognizing patterns. It could be like, why don't we do this? Because all you need is one good idea that makes sense, and for me, it has to be simple. I think the simplest
Oh,
things
yeah,
work best, don't they?
they
Um,
do. And the very first chief exec, Madeline Craggs, when I first joined the organisation, that was her route. Keep it short and sweet, and keep it sort of, keep it simple. That was
yeah,
that was the approach that she used to sort of say to us internally, and it's absolutely the right approach to take.
yeah, yeah. Good. And so, yes, you're going to be going out more regionally, as you've touched on today. What's that looking like? How's that working?
Yeah, so what that will be, so I mean, the team engage sort of quite engage regionally at the moment. With the regional societies, with the regional groups that exist. We can do that online or in person. We want to do more of that.
Hmm.
As I say, our meetings are currently, when we hold meetings, they tend to be London based. There's no reason for that to be the case moving forward. We can be, all over the country in terms of where we speak and engage. And I'd quite like to sort of get to a position where we've almost got like I'm going to describe it a bit like a roving reporter. I need to come up with a better title, Gilly. So again, if people have got help, can help me with that. But almost somebody that can go around and actually, be talking to osteopaths on the ground, and
Yeah,
actually, have much more of a sort of a conversation, much more of a one-to-one dialogue almost in many ways.
yeah,
Um, and that's going to look different for different parts of the country because what takes place in the south of the country will be very different to Wales, will be very different to Northern Ireland, will be very different to Scotland. And how do we, engage with our sort of devolved nations in a slightly different way to perhaps, what we've been doing, for the last sort of, couple of decades.
mm, fantastic. I think people will like that actually, because it does, remove that ivory tower feeling, by you being more visible, um, in person, but
Yeah,
equally it's good to be more visible online too, I think, so people
absolutely.
get to see. And I thank you so much for coming and talking to me today, because it puts a face to the name, I suppose, a character.
Yeah,
Because the minute I met you, we couldn't stop talking. We've spent an hour, I think, talking to each other. I hadn't sort of known anything about you before, other than your job title,
yeah.
obviously after Tim Walker left. And so yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you today, and I've covered a lot of ground, and I'm really grateful to you for spending time with me.
Gilly, it's been wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and genuinely there's an open offer, if you wanted, me to come back at any point and have a chat to you, but equally if you want anybody within the team, so if you wanted a particular deep dive around, CPD education or a deeper dive around fitness to practice, for example, colleagues within the organisation would be delighted to come and have those sort of conversations. So hopefully this can be the start of many, many chats with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
Super. It's been great talking, Gilly.
Thanks for listening to the Osteo Business Podcast. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe on all Gilly's channels, which can be found in the show notes. Gilly's back soon with more tips, ideas, and strategies to build your thriving practice.